Some truths don't fit in the youth of the soul. They only reveal themselves when life has already torn away our certainties, when the mirror shows the weight of time and the heart begins to ask questions the world doesn't know how to answer. The 5 lessons you're about to hear are like this: painful, liberating, and, for many, discovered too late. The curious thing is that no one teaches us the essential. We spend years memorizing formulas, accumulating goals, trying to be accepted, but almost nothing prepares us to truly live. Only after falling, losing, silencing ourselves, does consciousness begin to awaken. And then we realize that what we called normal life was merely survival. These lessons don't come from books, but from the experience that time imposes on those who seek to understand why we're here. They are principles that challenge the ego, confront fear, and reveal the power that has always been hidden within us. And what's most impressive is that when you understand these truths, everything changes. The way you see money, suffering, responsibility, discipline, and the very meaning of existence. But prepare yourself, because listening is easy, accepting not so much. Each lesson will confront you, like a mirror showing what you preferred not to see. Still, if you remain until the end, you'll understand that what seemed like pain is actually the call of your own evolution. Itzhak Bentov said that human beings grow when consciousness expands beyond fear. And that's exactly what these 5 lessons do. They expand. So take a deep breath and make space within yourself for what is about to be revealed. The first difficult lesson, the one that many only understand when they've already wasted too much time chasing the wind, is that prosperity is not synonymous with money. To prosper is to be in harmony with what strengthens the soul. It's living in coherence with what you believe, with what you feel, and with what you do. It's the balanced dance between mind and heart, between effort and surrender. The problem is that most people spend a good part of their lives believing that to prosper is to win, accumulate, be seen, conquer. And when time passes and the shine of achievements begins to fade, emptiness appears. It's at this moment that many realize, too late, that working tirelessly for external goals is not the same as flourishing from within. True prosperity is not in the quantity of things, but in the quality of consciousness. The human being who awakens to this truth realizes that life is not about obtaining more, but about being in tune with what makes them vibrate in peace. When the interior is in harmony, the world responds. Doors open because the vibration changes. Abundance doesn't come as a reward, but as a natural consequence of those who live in coherence. The person becomes prosperous not because they conquered the world, but because they allowed the world to align with their inner state. And there's a detail that few accept. Money is just a messenger, not the king of the process. It comes when there is balance and purpose, when the energy of the Creator is clean, when work is an expression of the soul and not an escape from fear. Money becomes energy in motion, not a burden that imprisons. But to reach this point, spiritual maturity is required, the maturity that is only born after many broken illusions. To prosper is to live in peace with one's own choices, to work with love, to care for relationships, to feel gratitude for one's own existence. It's knowing that the success the world admires is small compared to the serenity the spirit seeks. And this understanding is not taught in schools nor passed down through inheritance. It is conquered through experience, through pain, and through the clarity that time brings. When someone finally understands this first lesson, something changes silently within. A new feeling emerges, a light certainty that life is not a race, it's a path of expansion. And upon realizing this, the person begins to see themselves with more clarity. Because the next step, the next awakening, comes precisely from this discovery. If prosperity is born from within, then the power to transform everything is also within. This is where the second lesson begins, the one that separates those who still feel like victims from those who decide to take control of their own consciousness. The second difficult lesson, and perhaps the most painful to accept, is understanding that no one is a victim of destiny. The human mind has the habit of seeking culprits, of pointing outward, of justifying failures and pains in names, places, and circumstances. But when consciousness matures, the truth emerges with an almost uncomfortable clarity. Each person is responsible for what they create, for what they feed, and for what they choose to sustain within themselves. As long as a person believes the world is persecuting them, they lose the power to change their own life. Because every time someone declares themselves a victim, they surrender control of their own story. They become trapped in the role of one who waits to be saved, when, in truth, they are the only one capable of freeing themselves. This is one of the most transformative discoveries a human being can have, and also one of the most feared, because assuming responsibility means having nowhere left to run. It's at this point that many give up. They prefer the comfort of complaint to the strength of consciousness. It's easier to say it's the system's fault, the family's, luck's, than to look in the mirror and realize that the inner system is still maladjusted. But consciousness, once awakened, no longer allows self-deception. It demands coherence, calls for action, invites spiritual maturity. True power begins when the individual understands that nothing external has dominion over them, unless they allow it. Situations happen, people make mistakes, the unexpected arises, but the way one reacts to all of this is an intimate choice. And it's this choice that defines the course of life. The wise person doesn't seek to control the world, they seek to understand what the world is reflecting within them, because the exterior is just a mirror of the interior. This lesson, however, is not learned through reason, but through experience. It usually emerges after many disappointments, after realizing that blaming doesn't solve anything, that complaining doesn't heal, and that waiting for others is to remain stagnant. When consciousness finally understands this, something changes profoundly. The focus stops being on the problem and turns to the vibration that attracted it. The person begins to observe their own patterns, realizes that the same cycles repeat until they change, and understands that the universe doesn't punish, it only responds. Assuming responsibility is leaving spiritual childhood. It's stopping reacting and starting to co-create. It's when the human being understands that there are no victims, only learners, that life doesn't happen to them, but for them, and that each experience, no matter how hard it may seem, is an opportunity to elevate consciousness. And it's precisely at this point that the next learning approaches, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Because, after understanding that they are responsible for their own reality, the individual begins to realize how much they were feeding negativity without noticing. The third difficult lesson arises when the person finally realizes the power that their own words have over their energy. Complaining seems harmless, almost natural, a venting, an automatic reaction to what bothers them. But what many only discover too late is that each complaint is a seed planted in the soil of consciousness, and the terrain of the mind is fertile. Everything planted there grows, including what destroys. Complaining is a type of inverted prayer. It's an unconscious request for the universe to send more of the same. When someone complains, the focus fixates on the lack, the error, what's wrong, and the energetic field adjusts to that vibration, attracting situations that confirm that vision. It's a silent cycle, but devastating. Few realize how much this shapes reality. Those who awaken spiritually understand that the mind functions like a living algorithm. It shows more of what the individual seeks, feels, and reinforces. If the gaze is trapped in the problem multiplies. If the gaze turns to gratitude, the field begins to open to solutions. The universe doesn't respond to intentions, it responds to frequency. And complaining is one of the densest frequencies that exists because it's loaded with resistance. Beyond the energetic impact, there's also the physical impact. Modern science already understands that constantly complaining activates stress circuits in the brain. The body begins to release cortisol continuously, and this corrodes not only mood, but also health. The body feels the weight of what the mind repeats. The energy of complaint transforms into fatigue, anxiety, and a feeling of powerlessness. And the more one complains, the more the brain programs itself to see the world through this lens. That's why one of the greatest acts of wisdom is conscious silence. Not the silence of those who repress, but the silence of those who observe. The wise person observes the problem but doesn't merge with it. They recognize what's wrong without feeding the error with their own energy. And by doing this, they break the cycle of complaint, recovering the creative power that was being drained by the habit of complaining. Learning this lesson is liberating, but also requires vigilance, because the act of complaining disguises itself as venting, as sincerity, as opinion. The rational mind tries to justify the habit, without realizing that it's precisely this justification that keeps it stuck in the same place. Freeing oneself from complaint is, in essence, freeing oneself from self-sabotage. And when the human being finally understands this, a new type of perception begins to emerge. They realize that challenges are not there to punish them, but to train them. Consciousness expands and the view of suffering changes completely. It's then that the fourth lesson approaches, the one that reveals that pain, when properly understood, is not an enemy, but a teacher. The fourth difficult lesson that almost no one understands in time is that suffering didn't come to punish, it came to teach. It is the most demanding teacher of the human journey. The mind, accustomed to seeking comfort, treats it as an enemy, but the spirit recognizes it as a master. Suffering is the mirror that shows, with precision, where consciousness still resists the truth. As long as the individual flees from pain, they flee from their own learning. And that's why so many repeat the same cycles, change places, people, situations, but continue feeling the same emptiness. Pain, when ignored, changes form, but doesn't disappear. It returns, insistent, until the teaching is absorbed. Suffering is patient. It waits for the moment when the soul decides to learn. What differentiates those who grow from those who repeat themselves is the way they face pain. The ego asks, "Why me?" But consciousness asks, "What does this want to show me?" This simple change opens a new reality. Pain stops being punishment and becomes a guide. Suffering is no longer the end, it's the beginning of transformation. It shapes the internal structure, like fire that purifies gold. There's a turning point that every spiritual seeker one day faces, when they understand that suffering is the teacher who teaches without words, who tears illusions and reveals essence. No external master is capable of teaching what pain teaches in silence. It's pain that awakens compassion, that expands understanding, that makes us look at others and recognize their struggle without judgment. When the human being realizes that suffering is part of expansion, they begin to free themselves from the fear of feeling. They understand that each pain carries an invitation to evolution, and that resisting this invitation is to remain a prisoner of oneself. Suffering is not the enemy. It's the bridge between what one was and what one can be. It pushes consciousness to the next level, even when the ego begs to stay in the old. Itzhak Bentov said that the growth of the soul resembles the vibration of a string. Each tension generates learning, and each release brings harmony. It's this alternation between pain and understanding that refines the spirit. Those who understand this no longer seek to flee from suffering, they seek to listen to it. Because, by understanding its language, the being becomes free. And it's precisely at this point that the fifth lesson manifests itself, revealing that evolution is not sustained only by perceptions or moments of clarity, but by the strength to maintain the path when enthusiasm ends. Because after pain teaches, it's discipline that consolidates the learning. The fifth difficult lesson, which most only learn when enthusiasm is no longer enough to sustain them, is that discipline surpasses talent. At the beginning of the spiritual and personal journey, many believe that awakening depends on inspiration, luck, or special gift. But with time, life shows that true power is not in the brilliance of talent, but in the silent constancy of practice. Discipline is the invisible thread that stitches growth together. It's the bridge between what one knows and what one lives. Talent is like a spark. It ignites quickly, attracts attention, but if not fed, it goes out. Discipline, however, is the fire that never ceases, the one that maintains warmth even when everything around seems cold. It's what transforms knowledge into wisdom, intention into result, and dream into reality. The problem is that the human mind is enchanted with the idea of ease. It wants progress without effort, enlightenment without practice, harvest without planting. But consciousness doesn't expand through shortcut. Each true advance is born from small daily actions, repeated with presence. Spiritual discipline is this: the commitment to remain awake, even when fatigue tries to dominate. It's the "I continue" that echoes after each fall. Those who observe the movement of the universe realize that everything obeys discipline. Stars follow precise trajectories, nature's cycles repeat with perfection, the heart beats in a constant rhythm. Cosmic harmony is the result of discipline, and when the human being aligns with this principle, their life begins to reflect the same order. Confusion dissolves, focus becomes firm, and prosperity, that of the first lesson, becomes natural. Discipline is love in the form of constancy. It's the act of taking care of oneself when no one is watching. It's doing what needs to be done even without desire. It's keeping purpose alive when emotion no longer pushes. It's at this point that the seeker becomes master of themselves, because they understand that control of destiny is not in circumstances, but in inner mastery. Those who live with discipline build a stable mind and a confident heart. They understand that they don't need perfection to begin, they just need to begin and remain. 1% of daily improvement is enough, because time rewards the consistent, not the rushed. The universe bows before persistence, and when this truth settles in, the fear of making mistakes disappears. The person understands that the journey is made of attempts, falls, and new beginnings, and that success, spiritual or material, never belongs to the most talented, but to the most determined. But there's still a final lesson, hidden in all the previous ones, that few perceive: the power of beginning. Because after understanding that prosperity is harmony, that responsibility is personal, that complaining makes one sick, that suffering teaches, and that discipline sustains, comes the decisive point, the one where the soul understands that waiting to be ready is just another way of postponing one's own destiny. And it's at this moment that the last lesson reveals itself, the sixth and final difficult lesson, the one that closes the circle and reveals the heart of all the others, is understanding that no one needs to be ready to begin. Perfection is a subtle trap, a disguise for fear. How many lives remain stuck, waiting for the ideal moment, the right sign, complete courage? But the ideal moment never comes, the sign is the impulse itself, and courage only appears when the first step is taken. Human beings usually postpone their own expansion by believing they need to feel secure before acting. But security is a consequence of action, not the other way around. The universe responds to movement. When someone takes the first step, even trembling, the field reorganizes, doors begin to align, and the energy of fear converts into learning. No awakening happens in the comfort zone. The seeker who waits to be ready is, in fact, feeding their own imprisonment. They lose themselves in the illusion of control, believing they will be able to predict the path before walking it. But the spiritual journey doesn't fully reveal itself at the beginning. It reveals itself in layers as the walker advances. It's in movement that understanding expands. It's in error that mastery is born. It's in the attempt that wisdom consolidates. The great transformations of consciousness don't arise from certainties, but from acts of faith. Faith is not believing that everything will work out. It's knowing that even if something goes wrong, it will be useful. It's trusting that learning is already victory. That's why those who begin, even imperfectly, are already ahead of those who wait to be perfect before beginning. The fear of not being ready is the root of stagnation. It disguises itself as prudence, as planning, as logic, but it's fear. The fear of not being enough, of failing, of being judged. And it's curious to notice that while fear paralyzes, life moves forward. Opportunities don't wait. Time doesn't negotiate. The universe rewards movement, not intention. When consciousness understands this, everything changes. The first step stops being a threat and becomes liberation. The individual realizes that the path is built with each gesture, each choice, each attempt. Movement creates clarity. Action generates direction. And learning transforms fear into strength. This lesson is the point where all the others meet. Prospering requires harmony. Assuming responsibility requires courage. Silencing complaint requires presence. Embracing suffering requires maturity. Maintaining discipline requires constancy. But all of this only makes sense when there is movement. Nothing happens while waiting to be ready. Readiness is a consequence of the journey, not the condition to start it. And when this truth settles in, the human being finally understands that the power was always with them. Life never waited for them to be prepared, only for them to be willing. The invitation now is simple, but profound. Look at your own life and ask yourself, which of these lessons are you still resisting learning? And more importantly, what would happen if you decided to apply it today? The path of expansion is not reserved for a few enlightened ones. It's available to all who have the courage to observe themselves and transform. Consciousness doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. And the more present you are, the more life begins to respond in harmony. If this video touched something in you, share this message. Bring this light to those who haven't yet realized they are responsible for their own reality. And if you want to continue evolving, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and stay with me on this journey of consciousness expansion. Because the next lesson, the one the universe is preparing especially for you,